I'm with Deputy Tadier, who's been investigating about workers. They used to call them seasonal workers years ago now, but they're not seasonal at all now. There's a couple of guys here. There's a gang of about 50 Russian workers have been in the island, and they're coming to the end of what is a very short contract, which makes it to me seem very uneconomic for them to come all the way from Russia, travel halfway across Russia, pay all the fees, all the fare, everything else. Anyway, Monty's been investigating. What have you discovered, Monty?
Well, from what I've been told, and I've met three of the workers in question, and it's essentially, I think the simple word for it is exploitation. Just to contextualise, I've got some experience of having worked seasonally. So when I was 18, I went to France, did a season in a ski hotel. I was a kitchen porter, and there are certain things which you understand that will happen. You're going to work long hours, you're going to get probably fairly low pay, and you get accommodation provided, and certainly the accommodation I had was probably not legal, but you deal with some of these things, and of course it helps if you can speak the language and if you've got some kind of voice and if you've got a reasonable employer and it's for a short period. You deal with that. But I think some of the stories that I've heard go much beyond what anyone would consider reasonable. So certainly something that I took away last night, and I was quite moved and saddened by the experiences of these workers. For example, one of them said he had to work night shifts, very long night shifts, so you're looking at 12 hours effectively, 6 days a week. He did get a day off, so he was one of the lucky ones, but that's at a flat rate of effectively minimum wage. So you can imagine you're doing 6 lots of 12, 72 hours a week.
To start at the beginning, Monty, these guys were recruited in Russia.
Yeah.
There was a thing on the internet, and it was some sort of agency. They responded, they were interviewed, they were offered a job, which was specifically for agricultural work. So they offered, and they had to book their tickets, they had to get their visas and all that money. It cost them about £1,500, £2,000 to arrive here. When they arrived here, they had to do 10 days in quarantine, so they didn't earn any money then. Then they were put into a staff accommodation by one of the big employers here for agricultural workers. They were put in, they had to pay for their accommodation. Now they're working enormous hours. They're working 70, 80 hours a week to desperately try, and this was back in April, May. Desperately trying to earn some money. So they've got a 9 months, they thought, visa from the UK to come here, and they thought they would have 9 months of work. But come July, they were told, well, there is no more work. What have you learnt about that?
So there are all sorts of problems that arise from what you've just said. The first point is that everything should be done legally and everything should be done transparently, so that you know what you're getting into when you come here. So if you come as a seasonal worker, you're going to have to work hard, but you're going to get paid an agreed amount for it, and there'll be certain terms and conditions, including accommodation, that go with that. And so you come into it with your eyes open and you're treated fairly. But what seems to be the case here is that hasn't necessarily happened, certainly in these cases. So another problem is the fact that there's an expectation that they'll be here for 9 months, or certainly for longer than they would have thought. And okay, you might say, what's the problem if they have to go home after 4 months if they've earned their money? But there are tax implications for that. So there's something called the personal allowance. So most people, a single person can earn up to £16,000 in a year without paying tax. So that's quite good, isn't it? But if you're a seasonal worker, and even if you were a local person who decided to go travelling for half of the year, that tax allowance would be reduced in a pro rata way. So if you only work here 4 months of the year, that allowance is not £16,000, it's something like
I think these guys are even paying their long-term care allowance. I can't see what on earth that's got to do with them working here for 4 months. Anyway, I may be wrong on that, but the point is, they've come here with the expectation of having 9 months' work. Yeah. They thought they were going to have 9 months, and they've planned accordingly. But they are adamant they'd love to stay here and do more work if they could. They would love to do more work in farming. They're quite happy with it. But no, they've had to buy their tickets. They've had to pay for them to go back now. They've had to buy their tickets to go back to Russia, because there's a conflict between the UK permit, which is 9 months, and the local permit, which is not clear. It seems to be 9 months, but if they want it to be 4 months, they say it's 4 months. And it's totally... And when they arrived here, they were given a contract, which I've read it, and it sounded, well, reading it to my standard of English, it was in English. They don't speak English. They couldn't read it in English. And it looks to me like a contract for 9 months' work. No, apparently it's not a contract for 9 months' work at all. So they've got a really bum deal, in my view. They've got a dreadful deal. So they go back. But the employer says, oh, well, we might call you back in October and we might have a month's work for you there. This is not as though they're working in Weymouth. They're in Russia, for heaven's sake. And this is the same. You've got people from Indonesia, Nepal, all over the world, people coming in on these sorts of bogus contracts. What can we do about it?
Yeah, so I don't think it's that they're bogus contracts. I think they're just ordinary contracts, and that an employer can terminate any work contract when the work dries up within a year. So we know that unfair dismissal doesn't apply within the first year. So the employer doesn't need to give a reason to terminate a contract. There's no more work. And because they're reliant on their visa and they can't remain without work, they have to go back. And I think that's the issue, is that that they came here, as you say, on an expectation of 9 months' work, and they're effectively sent home, ejected from the island after 4. And as I've said, it's like without even necessarily a few days at the end so that they can see the island. So what I understand is that today it's a beautiful day. It happens to be their day off, and they're probably going to benefit from, you know, someone's being nice enough to take them around the island later, I understand. But imagine working in Jersey. The first time you come here, you're here for 4 months. You don't get any free time to explore, and I think that's one of the benefits of people going abroad, especially when they're young, is that they have some downtime, they can relax, they can explore, and meet locals.
Well, even at a tourism level, they're so keen that people go back and take a good message from Jersey. If I was one of these guys going back to Russia, I'd say, don't touch that place with a barge pole. That's what I would say. I mean, it's so dreadful what's happened to them, I think.
Yeah, and I think there are two things at play. There's clearly a post-Brexit scenario whereby, so previously, I mean, obviously these guys are not from the European Union anyway, but nowadays anyone who's not British effectively is an outsider and doesn't have automatic rights to remain in Jersey or the British Isles. And on top of that, you've got the problem that Jersey has always failed to get to grips with the proper population policy. And so what it's relied on in the past is these QALYs, whether it's 5 years or 10 years QALYs, and which I think are problematic anyway. We talk about that another time, and you know about that yourself. But on top of that, they're saying we don't want people to be able to get their QALYs, either 5 years or 10 years, and therefore we're not going to allow people to stay longer than 9 months at a time, so that they can never become permanent citizens.
What's the justification for these guys paying Social Security? They get no health benefits while they're here. There's not even a private health scheme. Now, in cases I've looked at before, other employers, they've had a health scheme in place for them. They've taken out private insurance. If these guys chop their finger off, which is possible, they're dealing with complicated stuff, where's the health scheme for them? I presume the employer would take them down to the hospital and try and get something. But where is it? Where's the safety factor? They're dealing with big machines. You know, I find it, the whole thing is... And the other thing about this, the Jersey Farmers Union has got a contract which it does, but it seems like this employer, for some reason, isn't following that. You're not following to the set guidelines of the industry. So they've opted out, and it seems like to me that there's an encouragement going on to bring people from countries which are outside the European Union so that they have got the opportunity to exploit them. That seems to be the trend.
So yeah, and I think you're right about the Social Security thing, because you have to have done 6 months' work, and then if you fall ill, you can claim Social Security allowance for that. So, of course, if you're not here for 6 months because you're not allowed to stay, why are they being charged Social Security? That's something I have asked before, and I'll be asking again.
Well, I hope you will ask. And I don't know who the minister for. I mean, we've got Social Security. We've got a very weak minister who's in there. I mean, unfortunately, we've got a lot of very weak ministers in place anyway. They don't seem to care about a social conscience, most part of them. But you were talking about the job opportunities. These guys can't go for another job. They were the employer they're with found them 6 weeks' work with another farm, which, according to my perception, the rules don't allow that. But they did that within themselves because it suited those two farms. But they can't go out and find another job. So they can't improve their own situation. They're stuck. If the employer says you've got to go back to Russia or wherever you go, Indonesia, you have to go.
So again, this is the decision needs to be made and was made about whether you give the work permit to the employer, person who's bringing people in, or you give it to the worker. And I think clearly the implications are different depending which you choose. So it might make sense if we had a different system where you said we will triage people that we want to come to the island. So we want people with X, Y or Z expertise at a given time because there's a shortage of work. That would at least give the worker the ability to pick and choose. You know, they might say, well, actually, I might be working for the farm this week, but if the conditions aren't great, or if someone can offer me better pay somewhere else or a better package, then I can go and work for them.
I mean, when we understand, farming is very seasonal, but they used to move people around. They used to keep them in accommodation, so they used to keep them until the next crop grows. But it isn't like that now. There's apparently this gang are going to be replaced by Polish, so we're told. Well, they're of course within the European Union, but some of those won't have settled status. They will be in a similar perverse situation as well. They'll have no rights to be here. They'll be on work permits, exactly the same. And when the system is finished with them, taking their few weeks of work, they'll throw them out. I mean, it's no good saying to people, it's a month's work. The other thing is they've already been asked, would you pay us £120 and we'll invite you back for next term? Well, they're not going to pay 120 quid out, are they, for their next invitation? So that's what they call it. It goes all on invitations, invitation to work. Well, I'd tell them to do what they want with that. That's what I would say to them. Yeah. It's just not fair. Everything about this whole situation is unfair.
So yeah, and as I said, like when I heard the story last night, I sat there with my wife. We were both listening, and we were, I think, shocked, horrified, and you know, I guess I knew that some of these things were theoretical problems. We know that the employment law in Jersey isn't fit for purpose, and I guess the other point is that a lot of these issues with the big employers don't arise because trade unions historically have negotiated positions, you know, so you do get paid a different rate for overtime, you know. So if I were working night shifts, and I've worked night shifts in the past, and they do take their toll if you're doing it a lot, but I thankfully did it for a short time, and it was part of shift work, and most employers will give you a shift allowance, and night work and overtime should attract a premium. So the other issue here is that, of course, the work permits cost money.
That's
so
right.
It costs about £150 to employ
Exactly.
a single farm worker, which is not a great deal in the scheme of things. You know, other companies might pay a lot more for different types of employees, but that's a consideration. So if it means choosing between getting one worker to do 80 hours a week or getting two workers both to do 40 hours a week and distributing the labour, what are they going to choose? So there's an incentive for the employer to engage in that kind of exploitative work model, which I think is an unintended consequence of the work permit.
I mean, I don't know who in the States is responsible for these people. I don't know who is responsible. Of course, they don't have an elective voice. They don't get a vote. They don't have any representation. You've volunteered to find out about them. There ought to be an officer in the States who is specifically responsible for now, because there's going to be so many people on work permits. They're going to have, and looks after their welfare, not just the pennies, looks after their welfare.
I think that's right. I think that needs to happen, but I think what needs to happen first is that there needs to be enforcement. So if the law says that you should give people a day off once a week or 2 days off every fortnight, and if that doesn't happen, there should be consequences. There should be a knock on the door from the regulator or whoever it is, whether it's the police or the Attorney General's office, saying, excuse me, you've broken the law, we're going to press charges. That doesn't happen. You know, you never hear of employment cases where bad employees are brought before the parish hall or the magistrate's court. Why not?
And we're in a situation where we're supposedly desperately short of people to do these sorts of jobs. So we're told, and obviously catering and tourism, whatever they call it now. I mean, all these jobs, they're desperately short of people to do it. Why these guys, if they're suitable and want to, can't transfer to other jobs, I do not know. What's the point of giving all this money to airlines to fly them backwards and forwards? I mean, you know, On a climate change, it's just so, in all levels, it's totally incompatible. Everything's about it. Anyway, we particularly came up here to be amongst the flowers. This is, of course, where they have the slave workers' memorial every year, and we all shed crocodile tears for the Russian workers and the Spanish workers and all the workers who were exploited during the war. And the public of Jersey have got to realise it's still going on.